To the other passengers, Maya appeared to be just another exhausted traveler, asleep in her seat. No one could have guessed she was a highly experienced pilot with thousands of hours in the air. That was until the captain suddenly collapsed just as a formidable storm loomed on the horizon. A flight attendant's urgent announcement over the intercom, pleading for assistance, would soon reveal Maya's secret and become the key to everyone's survival. The cabin lights had been lowered for the overnight journey from Chicago to Seattle. Through the small oval windows, the glittering lights of the city receded into a vast darkness as Flight 447 ascended to its cruising altitude. The Boeing 737-800 was almost at capacity, carrying 147 people, a mix of business professionals and families returning home after the Thanksgiving holiday. In seat 12A, Maya Chin adjusted the window shade before pulling her small travel blanket up to her neck. She had intentionally selected the window seat for its relative quiet and the ability to lean against the fuselage to sleep. To any casual observer, she was an unremarkable young woman in her early 30s, dressed in a comfortable gray sweater and dark jeans. Perhaps she was a teacher or a consultant on her way home from a week of meetings. The flight attendants had noted her quiet, polite demeanor during boarding. She had turned down a pre-flight drink, asking only for a pillow. Her only luggage was a small, plain black carry-on, devoid of any airline tags or corporate logos that might hint at her profession. While her movements were composed and self-assured, nothing about her suggested she was more than an ordinary passenger. As the plane leveled off and the seatbelt sign was extinguished, the cabin crew began their service. They moved through the aisle with practiced grace, their soft-soled shoes making almost no sound on the carpet. When they arrived at row 12, they paused, exchanging knowing looks at Maya's sleeping form. "She's been asleep since we left the gate," Janet Rodriguez, the senior flight attendant, whispered to her colleague. "Must have been a very long day for her." They took care not to wake her as they served the other passengers in her row. The man in 12B, a middle-aged executive in a pricey suit, was engrossed in his laptop, its screen dimmed. He glanced over at Maya and gave a sympathetic shake of his head. "Some people can sleep anywhere," he murmured to the attendant. "I wish I had that talent." Across the aisle in 12C, an older couple from Minnesota quietly chatted about their upcoming visit with their grandchildren in Seattle, their voices hushed out of consideration for the sleeping woman. "She looks like she could be a teacher," the woman whispered to her husband, "or maybe in marketing. These young professional women work such long hours." During the first hour of the flight, other passengers occasionally looked at Maya with a mixture of envy and curiosity. In a world that never seemed to slow down, the ability to sleep so soundly on an airplane felt like a rare gift. Some assumed she was a seasoned traveler who had perfected the art of sleeping in transit. Others speculated she might be suffering from burnout or personal stress. None of them could have possibly imagined the truth about Maya Chen or the profound irony of her tranquil rest on this particular flight. None of them knew that hidden beneath her ordinary appearance was an extraordinary skill set that would soon become indispensable for everyone on Flight 447. Maya was a veteran commercial airline pilot with a logbook boasting over 8,000 flight hours. She possessed an airline transport pilot license, the highest certification a pilot can achieve, and was certified to fly multiple aircraft, including the very Boeing 737 she was currently on. Her logbook, stored safely in her Seattle apartment, detailed a distinguished aviation career that started in the United States Air Force. After graduating from the Air Force Academy with a degree in aeronautical engineering, Maya spent 5 years flying C-130 transport planes. She had undertaken missions in some of the most demanding environments globally, from dusty airstrips in Afghanistan to icy runways in Alaska. Her military background had instilled in her the ability to manage emergencies with calm precision and to make critical decisions under immense pressure. After her military service, Maya transitioned to commercial aviation. She began as a first officer for a regional airline and eventually became a captain at a major carrier, flying routes across the country and dealing with everything from mechanical issues to severe weather. Just the previous month, she had expertly handled an engine failure during takeoff, safely returning her plane and its 134 passengers to the airport. This past week, however, had been exceptionally taxing, even for someone with Maya's fortitude. She had just finished her annual recurrent training, a grueling 3-day event involving intensive simulator sessions that covered every conceivable emergency. She had drilled responses to engine failures, hydraulic malfunctions, electrical faults, and severe weather encounters. The training was designed to be mentally and physically draining, ensuring pilots remained sharp. The final day had been particularly intense, with 8 hours in the simulator tackling multiple simultaneous failures, practicing low-visibility approaches, and demonstrating her crisis management abilities. She had passed every scenario flawlessly, but the experience had left her utterly exhausted. Following her training, Maya was looking forward to a few days of rest. She had deliberately booked this late-night flight as a passenger, wanting to decompress. She chose not to identify herself to the crew, a common practice for off-duty pilots who simply wish to travel without being pulled into minor operational matters. She had meticulously stripped away all indicators of her profession before heading to the airport. Her pilot uniform was back in her hotel closet, her license was tucked into her wallet, and her crew badge was at home. She was, for all intents and purposes, just another anonymous traveler. This anonymity was precisely what Maya craved. Too often, when traveling as a passenger, her identity as a pilot would be discovered, and she'd be asked to help with routine issues, calming anxious passengers during turbulence or offering a second opinion on a minor mechanical problem. While she was always ready to assist her colleagues, sometimes she just wanted the peace of being a regular passenger who could sleep through a flight. Tonight was meant to be one of those times. Her plan was to sleep for the entire 3-hour flight, arrive refreshed in Seattle, and take a cab to her quiet apartment for 4 days of well-deserved rest. In the cockpit, Captain James Morrison and First Officer Lisa Park were managing their own routines. Morrison, a 54-year-old veteran with over 15,000 flight hours, felt an unusual weariness. He had been a commercial pilot for over 2 decades, but recently he had been troubled by occasional chest pains and shortness of breath. He had mentioned it to his wife but, like many pilots nearing retirement, he was hesitant to see a doctor, fearing it could jeopardize his medical certificate and end his career. Tonight, the discomfort was more persistent. He chalked it up to the stress of the deteriorating weather forecast and a demanding flight schedule. He had taken some antacids before takeoff, telling himself he just needed to get through this one last trip. First Officer Park, 29 years old with 2,800 flight hours, was diligently monitoring her instruments, though a growing unease about the weather ahead was setting in. She was a capable and cautious pilot but had limited experience with severe weather operations. The meteorological reports indicated a rapidly intensifying storm system between their current position and Seattle, with forecasts of severe turbulence, hail, and dangerous wind shear. As Flight 447 cruised at 35,000 feet, none of the 149 souls on board could have foreseen the dramatic turn their journey was about to take. The convergence of Captain Morrison's failing health, the approaching storm, and Maya's hidden expertise, resting in Seat 12A, was about to create a life-or-death scenario. Suddenly, Captain James Morrison felt a searing pain in his chest. He gripped the control yoke, sweat beading on his forehead as he tried to remain upright. First Officer Lisa Park, engrossed in her instrument panel, didn't immediately notice. "Jim, are you okay?" she asked, finally seeing his struggle. I think I'm having a heart attack," Morrison gasped, his left arm going numb. "You need to take control," he managed to say before slumping forward, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic. Park's training took over instantly. She seized the controls of the Boeing 737, her hands firm despite the surge of adrenaline. "Captain Morrison is incapacitated," she announced into her headset, notifying Seattle Center Air Traffic Control. "We have a medical emergency in the cockpit and are requesting priority handling and immediate clearance to the nearest suitable airport." "Flight 447, Seattle Center copies your emergency," the controller responded. "What is the nature of the medical emergency?" "We have pilot incapacitation due to a suspected cardiac event," Park replied, her voice steady despite her racing thoughts. First Officer assuming command. "Requesting vectors to Seattle and paramedic assistance upon arrival." But as Park dealt with the immediate crisis, a second, equally grave problem appeared. The weather radar displayed a massive storm system directly in their path, a solid wall of red and yellow, signifying extreme turbulence and hazardous conditions. The pre-flight briefing had mentioned a developing system, but it had intensified far more rapidly than predicted. Park realized she was now solely responsible for 147 lives while facing a storm that would push the limits of her experience. In the cabin, passengers remained blissfully unaware. In Seat 12A, Maya continued her peaceful slumber. The businessman in 12B had finally put away his laptop and was dozing. Most people were asleep or reading, oblivious to the fact that their survival now rested on the skills of the flight crew. Senior Flight Attendant Janet Rodriguez took the emergency call from the cockpit and immediately grasped the severity of the situation. She quietly briefed her fellow attendants, using hand signals to avoid causing panic. Then, she spoke to Park over the interphone. "How bad is it?" "Captain Morrison is unconscious," Park's tense voice replied. "I'm flying single pilot into severe weather. I could really use some help from someone with more experience. Rodriguez understood. It was a long shot, but she knew that sometimes off-duty pilots were on board. "I'll make an announcement," she said. She had to phrase it carefully, specific enough to get a pilot's attention, but general enough not to incite panic. Taking a deep breath, she picked up the intercom handset, her words about to shatter the calm of Flight 447. Maya was dreaming of her first solo flight when the intercom crackled. Even asleep, her pilot's instincts were attuned to any deviation from the aircraft's normal sounds. An announcement at this hour was unusual and it stirred her from her sleep. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your senior flight attendant." Rodriguez's voice was composed, but Maya's trained ear caught the undertone of stress. "We have encountered a medical emergency in the cockpit, and our captain is unable to continue his duties. Our first officer is safely operating the aircraft, but we are also facing challenging weather conditions." Maya's eyes snapped open. The phrase medical emergency in the cockpit was a trigger, instantly activating years of training. If there are any qualified pilots among our passengers, commercial pilots, military aviators, flight instructors, or anyone with significant aviation experience, please press your call button immediately. We need your assistance. A wave of nervous murmurs swept through the cabin. The businessman in 12B sat bolt upright, his face etched with concern. The elderly couple across the aisle looked at each other with wide, worried eyes. "Medical emergency," the businessman whispered. "What does that mean?" Maya sat up straight, her mind instantly sharp. She could feel the subtle shifts in the plane's movement, indicating turbulence. Her experienced senses were detecting signs that no ordinary passenger would notice. She scanned the cabin, but saw only growing fear. Her finger hovered over the call button. A part of her resisted. She was exhausted and had desperately wanted to be just a passenger. But as the plane began to shudder more violently and she heard the rising anxiety in people's voices, she knew she had a professional duty. The lightning flashing outside the window confirmed they were entering the storm. Time was critical. She pressed the button. Rodriguez was at her side in an instant. "Are you a pilot?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Maya replied, unbuckling her seatbelt. "Commercial pilot, 8,000 hours. Military transport background, current on the 737. Relief washed over the flight attendant's face. "Thank God. The cockpit is this way." As Maya stood up, the businessman in 12B stared at her, stunned. "You're a pilot? But you've been sleeping this whole time." "I was off duty," Maya said simply, following Rodriguez toward the front as the turbulence worsened. "What's the situation?" she asked. "Captain collapsed 10 minutes ago. First Officer Park is flying, but she's never handled weather this bad alone. We're an hour from Seattle, but there's a huge storm in the way." The cockpit door opened. Captain Morrison was slumped unconscious in the left seat, while Lisa Park gripped the controls, fighting to keep the plane steady. "I'm Maya Chen, commercial pilot," she said, taking the observer's seat. "Lisa Park, first officer, 2,800 hours, Park replied, her eyes glued to the instruments. "I've never flown through anything like this as pilot in command." Maya's gaze swept the instrument panel. Everything looked stable except for the weather radar, which was a terrifying mass of red. "Okay, Lisa, you're doing great," Maya said calmly. "I'm here to help. What's our fuel?" "About 45 minutes remaining," Park said. "But Seattle might not be able to land us." Maya studied the radar. There was a potential path. "I see a gap about 30 miles south," she said. "If we deviate now, we can skirt the worst of it." "Are you sure?" Park asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I've flown through storms like this," Maya assured her. "Trust me. Request heading 180. As Park radioed the request and began the turn, Maya coached her. "Gentle inputs. Don't fight the turbulence, work with it." The next 20 minutes were a maelstrom of violent shaking and blinding lightning. Maya remained a pillar of calm, guiding Park through every downdraft and gust. "Airspeed's dropping." Park called out. "Add power, nose up slightly," Maya instructed. "There you go." In the cabin, passengers held on tight, some screaming as lightning illuminated the violent scene outside. "How's Captain Morrison?" Maya asked Rodriguez. "Still unconscious, but his breathing is stable." "Good. Lisa, how are you doing?" "Better with you here," Park admitted. "I was starting to panic." "That's normal," Maya said. "Look, we're almost through it." The turbulence began to subside, and Seattle approach came on the radio with landing instructions. As they started their descent, Maya helped Park with the approach checklist. "You know," Park said, "I was terrified when the captain collapsed. I thought we were all going to die." "You handled it perfectly," Maya replied. "You kept control, called for help, and accepted it. That's exactly what you're supposed to do." "But I'm just a first officer." "Experience isn't about rank," Maya said. "It's about how you handle situations like this. You gained more real-world experience today than most pilots get in years." The approach was smooth. As they broke through the clouds, the lights of Seattle spread out below them. "There's the runway," Park said, a newfound confidence in her voice. "Beautiful approach," Maya praised. "Just like the simulator." Park smiled. "The simulator never taught me how to handle a heart attack and a thunderstorm at the same time." "That's why we have procedures," Maya said. "And why we help each other." The plane touched down smoothly on runway 16L. As they taxied to the gate, emergency vehicles raced alongside. Maya felt a deep satisfaction, not just from averting disaster, but from witnessing Park's growth under pressure. "You know, Lisa," she said, "you didn't need me as much as you thought. You had it under control." "I couldn't have done it without you," Park insisted. "I just never expected my help to be the woman who was sleeping in 12A. Maya laughed. "Emergencies don't wait for convenient times. Sometimes help comes from where you least expect it." As paramedics boarded to care for Captain Morrison, passengers began to deplane, many stopping to thank the pilots. The businessman from 12B passed the cockpit. He said, "I owe you an apology. I had no idea." "That was the point," Maya replied with a smile. Later, as the cabin emptied, Rodriguez brought her a cup of coffee. "I don't know how to thank you. You probably saved all our lives." "I just did what any pilot would do," Maya said. She knew there would be reports and interviews, her quiet trip home now a major incident. But that came with the territory. Walking through the terminal, Maya thought about the night's events. She had boarded as a tired passenger in seat 12A, but when crisis struck, her training had made all the difference. Captain Morrison was conscious and his prognosis was good. First Officer Park had become a more seasoned pilot. And 147 passengers were safe, largely unaware of how close they had come to tragedy. The storm had passed. In the end, that was all that mattered.